Talk.
I'm sorry, what?
Now that we've switched from Computer Talk to Dharma Talk.
Yes, now that we're switching to Dhamma Talk, I'll turn the recording on. And
just to let you know, I have to go in about 45 minutes because I actually have to go to work. So just a heads up.
All right, that will be good. Let us go ahead and talk about this topic because this is a fairly important, interesting topic. You can start looking for it. And this is the topic of how we as little children begin to look at patterns, because the human mind is set up to be pattern matching, and how we start to make mistakes in that pattern matching, so that we begin to set up patterns we think are patterns, where in fact those patterns are not patterns in all cases. And so it gives rise to two different kinds of issues. One is called grandiosity, making things bigger than they actually are. And the other one is overgeneralization, of taking things that are diverse and grouping together under a label. Now, that overgeneralization can be seen as part of the territorial instinct. Because with the territorial instinct, we only have to make two kinds of groups, them and us. And so we start to do things like put them in a group of thems, where in fact they've got nothing else in common other than they're not me. And so that's an example of, in fact, that's a very big example, because it still happens quite often, that these pattern matching systems sometimes break down. So let me give you a few examples of where it's clear that human beings as a group or a collective all make the same mistake. All right. Here's the first example. There is no such thing as a United States Postal Service. Why do I say that when everybody thinks that there is? Because what they're doing is they're taking a whole lot of individual things and grouping them together under the label of United States Postal Service, to where in fact what you have is human beings who draw a paycheck, who go to a place, and there's a lot of different places, but that each one of those post offices, for instance, is a unique place. And so the post office in downtown New York City is going to be completely different than the post office in Dirt Hole, Wyoming. That's just the nature of things. And yet when I gave you the first label of United States Post Office, you thought of something kind of as if it was the entire group. Well, the next time I talk to someone else and I use the word United States Post Office, they're going to think of something else, not what you're thinking of. Another example, probably even a clear and almost humorous example, is Republican Party. Millions of people think there is one Republican Party, but in fact there's not. Every person who thinks a Republican Party has a slightly different viewpoint of the Republican Party. There's at least two major Republican parties, those that the Republicans who identify as Republicans see as the Republican Party, and then there's a Republican Party that is seen by those who identify themselves as Democrats. And so in that regard, there are actually two different realities. But then you divide that down, and Mitch McConnell's Republican Party is not Donald Trump's Republican Party. Isn't that interesting? But the mistake that they were making is the overgeneralization that the Republican Party actually exists. In fact, the Republican Party, when we really start looking at it, such things don't exist, except in the minds of humans. And because each individual human mind is different, that means that each individual representation or mentalization of Republican Party is actually different. So, in fact, there's actually millions of Republican parties. Everybody's taking it from their own personal point of view. All right. This is a way of beginning to look at Buddha's right, noble view does not take one of these individual viewpoints. Right, noble view is to see that there is no reason to make our own mentalization of United States Post Office or Republican Party, but rather we understand that there is very little consensus about what actually there is when the label Republican Party is used. All right, so these labels overgeneralize, and that ordinary right view, and here's a way of looking at it. Right view are of two types. First, there is wrong view, which is basically saying no to the things that actually exist. And right view says yes to those things that actually exist, but it's from a too narrow viewpoint, perhaps a selfish viewpoint. And the Buddha says it in the sense of it that it ripens in clinging. Ordinary right views always ripen in clinging in the sense that we're trying to take an advantage of that. So here's an example. I just got an email from it's a Yahoo group that it claims to be both atheist and Christians. I guess it's kind of dialogue, but one of the preachers on this constantly is posting more than other people. And recently he posted about generosity, but he was talking about it, render unto the Lord. But basically what he's actually saying is give me money, because it's not possible to render unto the Lord. It's not possible. Buddhism teaches generosity, and we practice generosity in the way of giving something to someone who needs it, who will be grateful for it, and will accept it and put it to use. So now let's take two people. One is some secretary who works in the office of the preacher, and we go in and we give the donation there. Or that we are out on the street and we see a panhandler that is in not good shape. In fact, we've seen him there often. And if I give him some money, he's going to take that money himself. He's going to be grateful for it. I'm going to acknowledge, and he's going to acknowledge, and it's not going to be a ritual. It's going to be a gift. And that both people get advantage from that gift giving. But if we give it to the church or an NGO, the person who receives the gift, it's not mine anyway, and they're just going to pass it on. And no one eventually ever gets any benefit from that donation. That in fact, every NGO or any organization at all always winds up taking on the personality of the people who work there. And part of the personality is selfishness. Everybody is selfish. We take our selfishness into the organization and apply it to the organization. Think of it as my job, my company, etc., like that. Which means now then that the preservation of that organization becomes more important than the original intention of that organization. Clear example of that is the Red Cross. More than 80% of all the donations they get go to the sustaining of the Red Cross. Only about 20% of their money ever gets to the field. All right, so this is, now we're talking about generosity in this mix of these other two things of grandiosity and taking and putting things together that don't belong together, overgeneralization. And so even generosity is overgeneralized in the Christian sense is that you're supposed to give to the church. But one of the ways that I would look at it is look at what's happened to all the wealth of the Catholic Church. It's buried somewhere under the Vatican. If they'd sell that stuff off and plant 1 billion trees, the planet would be a whole lot better off.
Couldn't that even be considered wrong view instead of just mundane right view in terms of hoarding wealth a lot, all the wealth of the Catholic Church, for example? That doesn't even strike me as mundane right view. That just strikes me as a lot of greed.
Exactly. I would agree with you there. I would agree with you. However, the little old ladies who donated that money were doing it with right view. In the sense, if I give to the Lord, if I render unto the Lord by giving to the Catholic Church, I'll get some benefits someday. All right. Okay. So, in fact, ordinary right view is based upon the law of karma, in the sense that we do good things and expect good results. And those good results may not be what we're expecting. That's, again, an overgeneralization. The law of karma is an overgeneralization. Now, the Buddha does say there are good deeds that when they are performed give good results, and there are bad deeds when they're performed to give bad results. But he also mentions that most deeds are of mixed motives and have mixed results. That the Western mind clearly sees collateral damage, unintended consequences. Things are far more complex than we think. So by overgeneralizing, we try to make things simple. We say, oh, there's a bunch of Taliban over there. Let's drop a really big bomb on them, right? Not recognizing that we're not really looking at everything very clearly. Yeah, so that would be wrong view. So, in fact, you could say that overgeneralization, grandiosity, and wrongly placed generosity will, in fact, migrate back and forth between wrong view and ordinary right view. But when we start taking a more supramundane right view, what that means is that we stop blindly using generalities, because especially generalities are confusing because there's no clear definition of what they are. Everybody's got their own ideas of what because of their own pattern matching techniques and summation of what that individual has learned. And so we have to watch closely when we're talking about generalities. We have to, if we're going to define the Republican Party, we have to define it within the context of one or two individuals and their relationship to the Republican Party. Because the Republican Party that Mitch McConnell has is not the same Republican Party that Donald Trump has. That's a very, very interesting position to take, because both of them are confused, thinking they have, because of their power situation, that they have the same allegiances to the same organization, where in fact it's not the same organization. And their allegiances are as maneuverable as their ideas of the organization. So that's an aspect of one's right view. Now, let's look at grandiosity, because grandiosity really fits into that. Grandiosity, in fact, leads us to clumping things together that don't necessarily belong together. For instance, if I feel bad, then I can feel bad about A, and I can feel bad about B, and because the patterns match that I don't feel good about these two things, I can lump them together where in fact they don't belong together at all. A very common example of that is blacks and Hispanics are often lumped together in the minds of many people.
So non-whites, basically.
Exactly. To where, in fact, The more you get to know individuals, the more you recognize that there's just as much diversity in the Latino community as there is in the black community, and there's actually even more diversity in the black community than there is in the white community. And so we have to leave that diversity as diversity and not collect it together into a lump or a ball. Lumping it together is one's ordinary view, but leaving disseparate things as disseparate is super mundane right view, because you're expecting things the way that they are. But going back now to this idea of grandiosity, basically what humans do is we try to communicate. Generally, we use language and words, etc., and the surface level of that, because we're actually trying to communicate a feeling. Whether that feeling is eureka, or whether that feeling is joy to be shared, or anger to be shared, or whatever like this, that a lot of communications that people have, even pleasantries, what we call little rituals that you and I do it. Hi, how you doing? How you feeling? You know, that introductory. We always go through that to try to get on each other's same wavelength. That's the way that humans communicate, to get on each other's wavelength. And we start with that. So we start at a known common place, and then we take it to whatever level that we're going to take it to. But the point that I want to make here is that feelings, when we're trying to communicate feelings, we often use words that are grandiose in order to describe how we feel. For instance, if two men chase me down the street, the first time I tell it, it's going to be 3. Then it's going to be 4. The next time it's going to be a whole mob was chasing me. This is just the way that we tell the stories, because we're trying to keep the intensity of the story up by adding to it things that will add to the story. But by doing this, we start lying. This is not true. A really clear example also of this is what in Buddhism we call malicious gossip. There's actually 2 different kinds of gossip. One is when you and I talk about a third person, but we both have that person's best interest at heart, and neither one of us are trying to play a game with each other about it. Malicious gossip, on the other hand, is Eric Berne actually had the names of these games down. One of them was Let's You and Him Fight. Let's you and him fight. Okay, how is that game played? I don't like Mr. C. And so I'm going to tell you why I don't like Mr. C, and that's when my grandiosity is going to come into play, because I want to convince you also to not like Mr. C. I want to divide and separate the two of you for some reason, whether it's a psychological advantage of me just feeling good that I have the power to separate you, or because merely I'm just so angry at him that I want the whole world to be angry at him. Or it could be even more sinister things, to where I actually want to see the two of you fight. This is actually the plot of many cowboy western movies from the 1950s. Is the game of Let's You and Him Fight. So that is where grandiosity comes in, and so it's feeling based. And so one's right view, one's right super mundane right view, should be that we should be able to see these feelings. Because if we can see these feelings, then we can recognize we do not have to become grandiose. We do not have to overgeneralize. And so these things are excellent tools for sati. So In the beginning, we practice starting with the body, and then we work with the mind, but eventually we start working with the feelings. And these feelings are basically the bigger problem. Liking things that we don't have, wanting to get rid of things that we don't want to put up with, and the ignorance associated with those feelings, which have ignorance in the beginning, middle, and end, which means that we thought these things up ignorantly. We maintain them or make them big ignorantly, and then they explode into dukkha ignorantly. A lot of people don't understand that wanting something that you don't have is suffering. And yet a lot of people will sit in meditation wanting to become enlightened. Wanting to become enlightened is a guarantee that you're not in it. You're wanting something that you don't have. That enlightenment is, in fact, becoming satisfied with how things are right now. And I can do without enlightenment, thank you very much. I can be happy without it. Now, that's actually another point. When I use the word enlightenment, I also recognize that everybody's got their own idea about what it is, and that it's almost always grandiose. That in fact, if they did know what it was, they would recognize they already got it. If they did know what it was, then they wouldn't make it grandiose. And if they did know what it was, then they wouldn't be playing victim. Oh, woe is me, I don't have it. Maybe I should work really hard to get it. Because that's the victim's position, to where the lion's position, the winner's position is, this moment is good enough. Right now is just fine. And by being in that kind of state, we can begin to see how these feelings rack us up. We become grandiose. We become overgeneralization. We put things together that don't belong together. We can't see things clearly. All because of feelings. This is, in fact, the mechanism behind the mind that takes us from that Vedana or feeling to tanha. The wanting then becomes grasping, because we're adding mental stuff there to make it more important and bigger. But in fact, the original point, the original feeling was merely, I liked it. But when we go from I like it to I want it, and I want it to I gotta have it, that I gotta have it, which is actually the time when we grab the thing off the shelf and plop it down on the counter, as well as our money. I gotta have this thing, you know. So by doing that, we are actually adding magic to that item, giving it power over my feelings. I wanted it, and I felt bad. Now that I have it, I feel good. Therefore, that item changed my feelings. And no such thing happened at all. The feeling was changed in the mind. It was a mental change that did not require that we bought that thing. In fact, we could have picked it up, almost taken it off the shelf, and then put it back and say, I don't need that. I can do just happy without it. And then we could come out of the wanting and recognizing, oh no, the satisfaction, the happiness from within is not dependent upon that item. Whether I buy it or not, I can still be happy. So in a way, we're doing, even in the time of purchase, we're adding grandiosity, we're adding magic, we're adding value to something that has no value at all. This is why the Buddha talks about emptiness or sunyata. because things do not have power over us. They're empty of their power over us, and they're also empty of meaning except for the meaning that we give them. And we almost always give meaning to things through our feelings. And so naturally, we're going to give grandiose meanings to things instead of actual meanings. But when one has noble right view, then by doing an investigation over and over again, we get a much clearer understanding. But the conclusions that we come to are always temporary, because we know that we continue to need to do the investigation. If we come to some conclusion somehow or another, it's going to become magical, in the sense that what used to be true is now not true because the circumstances changed. But we still hold on to that conclusion as if it were real. And so this is another way of looking at it from the perspective of right view. All right. But these are very, very psychological rather than Dhamma-oriented things. That grandiosity is a term that's used in psychology. And overgeneralization. But you can see exactly how these things fit directly into the teaching of the Buddha. That overgeneralization is what people do when they do not have supramundane right view. When they have supramundane right view, they leave the diversity as diversity and do not have to make it into a pattern that we recognize.
Yeah, I've been noticing this in a slightly different way. For me, I've been realizing and noticing this a lot in my speech and in my behavior. And so I would oftentimes kind of catch myself overgeneralizing, or many of these things you talked about, they would be on the verge of being said, and then I would kind of yank myself back.
Excellent, excellent.
So
that's exactly how we practice.
It comes up in the mind very frequently, but I'm trying to do damage control in the sense that at least I don't put it out in the world, and where it would cause even more harm, probably.
That's very good advice. That's excellent. So what you've been practicing really fits in with what I've been talking about today, and I'm really glad to hear that.
Yeah, I've really been noticing these things in my mind, which is kind of scary actually, because I don't like to think of myself as a person who overgeneralizes, and I don't like to think of myself as someone who engages in malicious gossip, or someone who has all these undesirable traits.
Okay, let's see if we can change that just slightly. Let's get a slightly different change of attitude about that, because in fact, by not liking those qualities in you, you're creating not liking. You're creating suffering in the sense of I want to be different than what I am. A slightly different view of this is that instead of seeing myself as one who does those things, I can see I am one who can see that I'm doing those things. Because already we've come up a step. Doing those things, because everybody's doing those things, but they're doing them ignorantly. Now we're beginning to see that we're actually doing those things, and now the not liking comes up. I see that I'm doing those things and I don't like it. This is exactly the first thing that we teach, and that is that when the mind wanders away from the breath, never mind, start again, because the students automatically think, well, I should have been able to watch the breath, and now I recognize, and I don't like it, that my mind is out of control. This is exactly that same situation at the next step. All right, and at every level, your job is to change your attitude from the attitude of I do not like what I see in myself into the attitude that I congratulate myself for seeing that stuff. Okay? So that song, Pick Yourself Up, Dust Yourself Off, and Start All Over Again is exactly what we need to do here, because what you've done is you've recognized that you fall down sometimes. Okay? Well, why just lay there? Well, maybe that's not a bad thing to do, but eventually the idea in Dhamma is never mind that we've messed up. That we get up, we dust that stuff off of us. The stuff that we fell into, we dust it off. We get rid of it. We throw it out, and we start again with joy. So when you get to the point of that you're angry and you're about to become grandiose, and you say, aha, I can see that grandiosity. And then you stop it. You automatically stop it. The only thing now is that you have to start to congratulate yourself. Wow, I didn't let that one out. And so you begin to see a success along the way, every step of the way.
Yeah, it's just that you're right, of course. I'm seeing the system, how it plays out on different levels, but it's just that it can be a challenge to actually clearly see all the things that are going on. Like when you start meditating, the first thing or at least in my case, without overgeneralizing, was that it's really tough to see how unruly and untrained and what a mess the mind really is, and to really face that fully can be a challenge. And I feel like in the case of emotions and even character traits, so things that in ordinary view really determine me as a person, that's even more difficult to face up to say, I mean, to put it very, very ordinarily, like how flawed I can be at times. Not to say that I'm a terrible human being or something, but
yes, you are. You're saying that, and I'm about to stop you from doing it.
Damn it.
All right. Because it does not matter how. The flaws are not what matters. What matters is your attitude. To change your attitude from being a victim of all of those things to being the champion who is a champion of all of those things. And by being a champion of them and having the idea that you're better than they are, then you don't feel those feelings of being overwhelmed by them or being challenged by them.
Yeah.
Right? In fact,
this is
see
actually
the challenge as a happy game to play.
Yeah. This is just an exact copy of what we talked about the first time we talked, when you explained this exact same thing to me regarding meditation, and I just really fell into the trap of having the exact same pattern of disliking it and kind of identifying with the loser's position.
Everyone does. This is part of the training.
Yeah.
Everyone does this. And if there is not a teacher to keep changing that back and start looking at that attitude, that right view and right attitude are the first two steps of the Eightfold Noble Path. There's a reason for that.
Yeah.
One has to change the attitude.
Yeah. It's funny to me how very similar those situations are, and how I just like the exact same thing happened. I just reacted in the exact same way in both cases. It's just funny.
Actually, yes, I hope that you can see that it's funny. It's funny. It's insightful. It's in fact instructive. It's educational when you see it that way. Or you can see it as, oh no, now there's two of them. I felt bad when there was A, but now there's a B too. Oh, I'm such a victim. All right, no, that's what you used to do. In fact, that's what you're seeing that you're doing. And that's excellent. So you can begin to come out of it. It's a major attitude change. And that this is the way that it works. And we will talk about this in great detail later. But basically, right view comes first. But right view needs to be kicked off by sati. So in fact, instantaneously, the first thing that happens is to remember. All right, and what are we going to remember? Ultimately, in all regards, we're going to remember that there is a supramundane right view. And then we're going to take the effort to come out of wrong view into supramundane right view. And so that's one's right effort. Right effort is to come out of wrong view into right view. By coming into right view, one now has the energy and the wherewithal to apply right attitude. So with right effort, right attitude can change. So these four aspects of the Eightfold Noble Path are in operation from the very step one of Anapanasati. The very first instruction also has these four elements in it. Right sati, right mindfulness, or the ability to remember. What do we remember? Whatever our object was, which is the one's right view. And that right view is going to get higher and more expansive as we talk, but we've already talked about it in regards to generosity, gratitude, and overgeneralization. All right, and so there's many aspects to right view, but sati is to remember right view, even if that moment in time is to shut my mouth because I recognize, or never mind, to start again, come back to the breath. Always the right view is there, and so one's right effort is to take on right view, and then one's right effort is to change that attitude from a negative loser's attitude into the positive attitude, the can-do. Wow, isn't it marvelous? In Anapanasati, the Buddha mentions this at stage 10 or step 10 of Anapanasati, gladdening the mind. To gladden the mind. See the mind as it is and then gladden it. There's many ways or techniques of gladdening the mind, but one of the ways that is most useful is through success. Well, what success are we talking about? If you can see the mind wandering away, that's success, as opposed to the failure of not seeing the mind wander away. If you can see the things that are happening in the mind, anger, frustrations, and whatever's like that, if you can see them, that's sati. Put together with these other four aspects that are three aspects that run a circle around one each other, and you've got a unit whole here that's a really winner's position. And so therefore, even though the amount of work or effort is going to remain the same, now we're doing it with right effort so that it doesn't look so much of a challenge. Part of the problem with challenge or that this stuff is hard is because we're doing pattern matchings with the past, how it is right now, and projecting that pattern into the future. The right way to look at it is stop trying to match up patterns of this, I've seen this before, and how is it going to be in the future, and just look at it right now in the sense of, there you are again, I see you. Almost as if you begin to play a hide and go seek with your game, with your suffering. Always the right attitude. The Buddha was a lion, not a wimp. He was not bashful. He was not a victim. He was a lion, known to be a lion. Numbers of suttas have lion references to the Buddha.
Yeah, I feel like um, when this cycle maybe works very well when um, when there's when the right attitude is there, the effort doesn't really seem that hard. It's not that effortful. It's not like lifting 1,000-pound weight. It's more like doing a minor correction, like a slight change, like a slight effort, and then just keep repeating that 100 million times, and then
That's grandiosity right there.
God damn it. No, but
That's grandiosity too.
yeah. The way I was thinking about it was in meditation, the act of coming back to the breath when there's a lot of judgment and a lot of loser's attitude, basically, that makes it really hard and really effortful. And there's a lot of suffering. But if the right attitude is there, then it's not a big deal. It's just come right back. It's just this minor little thing you have to do. And
it actually becomes joyful.
Yeah.
An enjoyment to be here now. All right. Well, this seems to be a pretty good place to end this talk. We've covered our topics, and you said that you had to go in about 45 minutes, and we're up at about 42 now.
Yeah, I mean, I could take like 10 more minutes. That would be fine. But if this is a natural stopping point, then that's
yeah,
fine
I
as well.
think that this is a fairly good natural stopping point, and we'll continue on with Anapanasati and whatnot.
I was wondering something.
Yes, go ahead.
As I'm doing my meditation practice, there's a lot of questions coming up for me, and it seems to me that you have some kind of plan for where you want our sessions to go, and I was wondering if there's space for me to just bring up like unrelated questions, not in the sense that they have nothing to do with the Dhamma, but in the sense of something came up for me in meditation. Can I bring it up?
Everything is associated with the Dhamma. The Dhamma, there's many different ways to say it. One of the ways to say it is Dhamma actually becomes God. Not in a personalized dude with a beard sitting on an ivory throne throwing lightning bolts. Not that kind of God, but the God in the sense of the ocean that we swim in, the universe, the reality of the situation. Everything is in Dhamma. So go ahead. You can ask questions.
Nice. That's good.
I'm just making the point that they're not unrelated.
No, the point I was trying to make is that you seem to have somewhat of a plan to kind of systematically talk about different things. Start with right view and then progress from there. Mindful, like almost like a curriculum.
Yes.
Where it's structured.
Yes.
And I didn't want to disturb that too much by bringing up like very different stuff.
No, that's the point. Okay, let me give you a very short talk on this. There are two ways of education. One is the organized formal way, and the other one is the informal way. This happens in education, whether it's in a university or whether it's in the classroom. They're almost always done organized. The places where they're doing it naturally is in a lab. Some courses have labs. So the course itself is almost always with a syllabus. But a lab is where you get to experiment with the things that you were talking about in the class. All right. The Dhamma is best told in a natural environment, on a one-on-one. And so every one of the lineages, they want to talk about the teacher because they knew that teacher They were with that teacher. They spent time with that teacher. They asked their own questions to that teacher to help them understand the Dhamma. But there is let us say, a very, very well-known sequence of events that happen to an individual, and that they more or less happen in that order. But those things that I'm talking about are not events; they're processes. That each one of these things is a process, but the processes begin to overlap as they go up. All right, and as they go up, there's various labels for them. All right, one would be the first label that they will put on is Sotapan, then Sotagami, Anagami, Arahat, and there are 10 fetters associated with that. All right, the questions that you and I are going to be most interested in dealing with right from the very get-go is, what is the first step of the Noble Path? That's where we need to get. We need to get down to the station so you can set foot on that train. All right, the first step of the Noble Path is well known and well defined by the Buddha, and well taught and well understood. And from there, then we will go on in progression. However, what you have curiosity about needs to be dealt with, even if what we're dealing with is way up there on the end, because you've got a basic general understanding of where things are. So it's kind of like the difference between a novel and a research journal or something like that. To where a novel, you need to start at the beginning and go right through it in order to get the sequence of events. That's also more or less true for a math book. You do not start at chapter 10 of a math book unless you're already familiar with the other parts of that math book, right? At least some of them. But there's other things where you can pick and choose what topic, like a research journal or a magazine, that you can read this article and then you can read that article, and by reading both of them, it doesn't matter which one you read first, you can see the connection between the two of them anyway. And so what questions you have are very important to you until you recognize that they're not important at all, and we'll eventually cover that stuff.
That's actually what I was hoping to hear.
But it's also good to cover them in the order that the student needs. Okay, let us say it like this. Let's say that you're a student of medicine, a medical doctor. And this year we study these kinds of parts of the body, and that year and the next year we do those kinds of things. And then the third year we talk about how to set bones or how to set limbs. All right. Meanwhile, your brother broke his leg 2 years ago. Are you going to wait for your third year of medical school when they actually do it in classroom, or are you going to go find out what needs to be done right now about that leg? Okay. That sometimes, in fact, situations present themselves to where the student, if they do it right now because this is a big deal, they can make really good progress in a lot of different areas because everything is interconnected anyway. But if the student just sits on it, it will kind of rot. And then later when we cover it, it's old, it's stale, it's not as valuable. And so I always allow students to ask questions. All right, there's something else going on with that, and that is that their questions that they ask will almost always define where they are in their practice anyway, and that's a good place to start to go forward.
All right, good. I will collect all my questions on a huge sheet of paper, so I remember them.
Rank them in classes, because I bet that you're rephrasing the same question in several different ways.
Okay, so make like clusters of related stuff that maybe would be good to deal in one session or something.
Yes, that would be a way of doing it.
Okay, perfect.
Eventually, instead of having a dozen questions or 30 questions, you'll have 1 or 2 burning questions.
Okay.
All righty. Well, let's finish now.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Excellent. Okay, see you soon.